So this is an overview of Chapter 11. Technology, technology and economic definition. We're going to talk about the short run and long run in economics, the marginal product of labor and the average product of labor, the relationship between short run production and short run cost, graphing cost curves and costs in the long run. The basic activity of a firm is to use inputs, for example, workers, machines, natural resources, to produce outputs of goods and services. We call this process by which a firm does this technology. If a firm improves its ability to turn inputs into outputs, we refer to this as a positive technology change. Technology, by definition, is the process a firm uses to turn its inputs into outputs of goods and services. The technology change is a change in the ability of the firm to produce at a given level of output with a given quantity of inputs. Let's talk about this in the real world. UPS was late delivering millions of packages leading up to Christmas in 2013. To correct this, in the following years, UPS could hire more workers, purchase more capital like airplanes. Instead, they decided to improve technology, to make its workers more efficient. They got better scanners to help with sorting and better maps and routing for delivery drivers. So economists refer to the short run as a period of time during which at least one of the firm's inputs is fixed. A firm might have a long-term lease on a factory that's too costly to get out of. But in the long run, a firm can vary all of its inputs. So in the short run, something is fixed. In the long run, everything varies. They could adopt new technology, increase or decrease the size of its physical plant. How long is the long run? It varies from firm to firm. Just think of it as a long enough period of time that anything can be changed. Talking about fixed, variable, and total costs. These are important concepts. The division of time into the short and long run reveals two types of costs. Variable, which are costs that change as outputs change, and fixed, which are costs that remain constant as output changes. In the long run, all firms' costs are variable, since the long run is a sufficiently long time to alter any level of input. Total cost equals your fixed cost plus your variable costs. So an academic book publisher turns its inputs, intellectual property, labor, printing machines, paper, factory, electricity, etc., into outputs, books. As it increases the number of books it publishes, some of those inputs stay constant and some rises. Some are variable and some are fixed, right? The machine is probably fixed. Maybe labor hours are variable, right? Electricity in manufacturing is usually variable. So an important concept is explicit and implicit costs. Recall that economists like to consider all opportunity costs of an activity, both explicit costs and implicit costs. An explicit cost is one that involves spending money. They're usually pretty easy to identify. And the implicit cost is non-monetary. So it's much harder to identify. It involves identifying resources used in the firm that could be used for another beneficial purpose. If you own your own firm, you probably spend time working on the firm's activity. Even if you don't, quote unquote, pay yourself explicitly for that time, it's still an opportunity cost because you could be doing something else with the time. You could get paid at a job. So let's talk about Jill. Let's suppose Jill Johnson wants to quit her $30,000 a year job to start a pizza store. She uses $50,000 in her savings to buy the equipment, furniture, etc. She takes out a loan as well. The items in red are explicit costs. So pizza dough, sauce, other ingredients. So she spends $20,000 on ingredients, $48,000 on wages, $10,000 on interest to buy the pizza ovens, $6,000 on electricity, $24,000 in the year on the lease payment for the store. Now, that's her explicit cost, but she also has to include the $30,000 she's giving up for the salary, $3,000 in interest that she was earning on the money invested, and the economic depreciation. An economic depreciation is a decrease in resale value on the capital items that Jill bought. All of these implicit costs are real costs of Jill owning the pizza store, even if they don't require an explicit outlay of money. Notice that Jill is charging herself for the money she took out of her savings, just like the bank charges for her loans. So that's why the interest is on there, because she was getting interest in the investment, the $50,000. I'm not sure she's making $3,000, but that's okay. Jill Johnson's restaurant turns its inputs, pizza ovens, ingredients, labor, and electricity, into pizza sales. To make this analysis simple, let's consider only two inputs, the pizza oven and the workers. The pizza oven will be fixed. We will assume Jill cannot change in the short run the number of ovens she has. And the workers will be variable. We can assume that Jill can easily change the number of workers she has. Jill Johnson's restaurant has a particular technology by which it transforms workers and pizza ovens into pizzas. With more workers, Jill can produce more pizzas. This is the firm's production function, the relationship between the inputs employed and the maximum output. So at 0 workers and 2 pizza ovens, she produces 0, and the fixed cost is $800 because the ovens are still there. So then at 1 worker, she has still 2 pizza ovens. She produces 200 pizzas per week. The cost of the ovens is fixed, so it's $800. Her variable labor is $650. The total cost is $1,450. The average cost per pizza is $725. Now 2 workers can still produce $450. So then we get all the way over, and the average pizza cost, because wages went up, but pizza ovens stayed the same, is $467. Now 3 workers, 2 pizza ovens, the quantity of workers per week, the output, and they're producing 2,750. That's $5 is the average cost. So 4 workers, 2 pizza ovens, 600 is the quantity of pizzas they produce. The cost of fixed cost is still $800. The variable labor is $2,600. The total cost of pizzas per week is $3,400, and that's $5.67. The reason this is going up is the workers aren't efficient because there's only 2 ovens, and eventually you have too many workers not producing enough per person. Each pizza oven costs $400 each week to operate. So if she has $800 in fixed costs and it goes up $650 for each employed worker. Using the graph, you'll notice that there is not a 0 when quantity is 0. That's because of fixed cost. This is her total cost, fixed plus variable, right? It keeps increasing. If we divide the total cost of pizzas by the total number of pizzas, we get an average cost per pizza. The lower levels of production, the average cost falls as pizzas rise. At higher levels, the average cost rises as pizza rises. The falling then rising nature of total cost makes a U shape. Our next task is to examine why there is a U shape for average. Suppose Jill just hires 1 worker. What does that worker do? They have to take orders, make and cook the pizza, take pizzas to the table, do the cash register. By hiring another worker, these tasks can be divided up, allowing them to specialize and resulting in a division of labor. 2 workers can probably produce more output than the 1 worker alone. What happens when she hires more workers? Let's think about this. Consider a marginal product of labor, the additional output a firm gets as a result of hiring 1 more worker. The first worker increases pizzas by 200. The second increases output by 250. The third worker increases output by 100. Additional workers add to the potential output, but not by as much. Eventually, they start getting in each other's way. There is only a fixed number of pizza ovens, cash registers, etc. This is the law of diminishing returns. At some point, by adding more of a variable input, such as labor, the amount of the fixed input, such as capital, will cause the marginal product of the variable input to decline. So graphing this out, we have total output, then we have the marginal product per worker. So when increasing, and then it starts going down, right? Because if you have 6 workers and 2 ovens, you're running into each other. Another useful indicator of the output is the average product of labor, calculated as the total output by a firm divided by the quantity of workers. when 3 workers at the restaurant can produce 50 pizzas, giving an average product of labor of 183.3, or 550 divided by 3. A useful way to think about that is the average product of labor is the average marginal products of labor. The first 3 workers give 200, 250, and 100 additional pizzas, respectively. That's how you got to the 550. With only 2 workers, the average product of labor was 225. So the third worker makes the product of labor go down, the average. This happened because the third worker is less productive or has less marginal output than the previous workers. If the next worker produces more marginal output than the average, then the average product will rise instead. Paul's semester, this happens in GPAs. Starts off poorly, then rises, then eventually falls in his senior year. His cumulative GPA follows his semester GPA upward as long as the semester GPA is higher than cumulative. When his semester GPA dips below the cumulative starts to go down. So Paul's cumulative is rising as his semester GPA is rising, but then when it dips, so does his. We have already seen average total cost, which is total cost divided by output. We can also define marginal cost. Marginal cost as the change in the firm's total production total cost from producing one more unit of a good or service. MC equals the change in total cost over the change in quantity. Sometimes change in quantity equals 1, so we can ignore the bottom. But don't get in the habit of doing that, or you'll make mistakes when change in quantity is more than 1 unit. We can visualize this. So this red line is Jill's marginal cost of producing pizzas, right? And this is Jill's average total cost of producing pizzas. So we know that the total cost can be divided into fixed and variable. By dividing both by Q, the first quantity is the average total cost, the second is the average fixed cost, and the third is the average variable cost. So average total cost equals average fixed cost plus average variable costs. So observe that in each row, average total cost equals average fixed plus average variable. When MC, marginal cost, is above ATC, ATC is falling. When MC, marginal cost, is above ATC, ATC is rising. The same is true for MC and AVC, so average variable costs. This results in both ATC and AVC having their U upward shaving curves. The marginal cost curve cuts through each at a minimum point, since they both have average total cost and average variable cost. They follow the marginal cost curve. We're not getting that deep into this, but this is the average fixed cost. Now remember, average fixed cost is going to keep going down because you didn't change the fixed cost within a relevant range. Recall that the long run is sufficiently a long period that everything can vary. So in the long run, there is no distinction between fixed and variable costs. A long-run average cost curve shows that the lowest cost at which the firm is able to produce at a given quantity of output in the long run, there are no fixed inputs. At low quantities, a firm might experience economies of scale, the firm's long-run average cost failing as it increases the quantity of output it produces. Here's a small car factory that can produce at a lower average cost than a large one for small quantities. So, as you can see, but Ford is going to be able to scale much bigger. So eventually firms might get so large that they experience diseconomies of scale. This is a situation in which a firm's long-run average cost rises as the firm's output increases. This might happen because the firm gets too large to effectively manage, or because the firm has to employ workers or other factory production that is less well suited for the production. Why might a car company experience economies of scale? Production might increase at a greater rate than proportional rate as inputs increase. Having more workers allows people to specialize. A large firm might be able to buy inputs at a lower price. But economies of scale will not last forever. Eventually, managers will have difficulty coordinating huge operations. Demand for high volumes saps your energy. Over a period of time, it erodes focus and thins out expertise and knowledge we painstakingly built up over the years. This is the president of the Toyota's plant. Henry Ford is well known for his success in producing cars on an assembly line, allowing division of labor to help achieve economies of scale. Hoping to build on this, Ford built an enormous industrial complex on the river in Michigan to produce the Model A. Model A lost money for Ford because the river road complex was too large to allow efficient production, producing a disconnect between workers and management. So let's do a summary of the cost. So total cost, known as TC, is the cost of all inputs used by a firm, or fixed cost plus variable cost. Fixed costs are something that remains the same as output levels change, or FC. Variable costs are costs that change with the firm levels of output changes, VC. Marginal cost is the total cost resulting from producing another unit of output. MC equals the total change in total cost divided by quantity. Average total cost equals the total cost divided by the quantity of output produced. Average fixed cost equals fixed cost divided by the quantity of output produced. And average variable cost equals the variable cost divided by the output produced. Remember, implicit costs are non-monetary costs, and explicit costs are costs that involve spending money. And that's where we're going to end.